This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. New mug. Who dis? As COVID cases surge across the country, we compare the response stateside and in Europe as they fight to get a third wave under control. Then, are cartoons making a comeback? The pros of producing animated shows during the pandemic. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Today, biotech company Moderna announced its COVID-19 vaccine candidate has shown a high success rate and could be ready for distribution over the coming months. Preliminary results from Moderna's early clinical trial data show the vaccine is 94.5% effective.
Knowing the vaccine is going to be effective is great news, but we still need to complete the regulatory process, which involves completing the study and generating more data, even some follow-up and safety data. And then, of course, we need to get busy manufacturing.
Last week, pharmaceutical giant Pfizer announced early data from its own trial show its vaccine to be more than 90% effective. Dr. Anthony Fauci says with these developments, vaccinations could start as soon as mid-December. High-risk groups like healthcare workers, the elderly, and people with underlying medical conditions will likely be the first to receive a vaccine distributed en masse, while the general public might be waiting on a vaccine until the spring.
Not going to turn it on and off, going from where we are to completely normal. It's going to be a gradual accrual of more normality as the weeks and the months go by, as we get well into 2021.
By now, we know this holiday season will be unlike any other. As a sign of the times, the CDC has a whole page dedicated to how we can safely celebrate Thanksgiving during the pandemic. This is usually the time of year when we hear about record-breaking travel, but AAA projects less than 50 million Americans will actually end up traveling this Turkey Day. Now that sounds like a lot, but this marks the most dramatic one-year drop since the Great Recession of 2008. Health experts are urging Americans to avoid travel and celebrate only with your own household. But if you are planning to go somewhere, you should already be quarantining. And if you're doing any kind of gathering with friends or family, doing that outdoors, if possible, is definitely the way to go.
Once you bring it indoors to anybody's home, you got 5, 10, 20 people inside, you're running the risk of spreading something. And since 40% are asymptomatic, somebody in that room is likely going to have it.
If you're opting for a virtual celebration, you might still be able to get that game of family football in, but you might just be breaking out some Madden on the Xbox instead. Unfortunately, we are not done talking about hurricane season. Today, much of Central America braced for the arrival of Hurricane Iota. It's the first Category 5 storm to make landfall in this record-breaking hurricane season. Nicaragua and Honduras are still recovering from landslides and flooding caused by Hurricane Eta, which made landfall just 2 weeks ago as a Category 4 storm. There have been 30 named storms this Atlantic hurricane season. That's the most ever. Hurricane Iota also became the 10th storm of the season to rapidly intensify. Scientists say it's becoming more common due to warmer sea surface temperatures from climate change. We're already experiencing the third wave of the coronavirus pandemic. While we are on the cusp of seeing a deliverable coronavirus vaccine, 2 states, Texas and California, have reported at least 1 million cases apiece. But while cases are spiking in the US, Europe is taking a drastic approach that's helping flatten the curve. Newsy's Ben Chamiso explains.
While cases of the coronavirus go straight up in the US, some European countries appear to be flattening the curve. Countries like Spain, Germany, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and the Czech Republic all imposed new lockdown measures in the past few weeks to stop COVID-19 outbreaks and to prevent ICU units from filling up. The new rules include, among other things, closures of bars, restaurants, and gyms, and restrictions on travel and social gatherings. Despite pandemic fatigue among people running out of patience with stringent restrictions, the lockdown measures are yielding results, according to daily COVID-19 data. Data in France also shows that the lockdown is substantially reducing public mobility, although not as much as in late March during the first lockdown. In the US, where COVID hospitalizations are at a record high and the virus is surging across the country, some states and cities are also starting to tighten restrictions in the absence of a federal response.
Today, the Department of Health and Human Services is issuing an epidemic order every part of our state will see rollbacks in some sense.
But it remains to be seen whether the new rules will be as comprehensive and efficient as in some parts of Europe. Ben Chamiso, Newsy.
NBA, WNBA, NWSL, NHL, they're all doing it.
As the coronavirus has quickly spread across the
A
world,
freeze on travel has the potential to reshape why people fly.
This halt in traditional entertainment highlights how viewers and creators are coping together.
healthcare systems in the U.S. will need 3.5 billion masks.
The economic damage looks very different on either side of the Atlantic.
There are only about 117,000 beds nationwide.
When can we get back to normal?
Weirdly enough, trending topics also happened over the weekend. Who knew? We'll get you caught up on some of this and some of that. Here's what's trending. It worked pretty well at the pro level. Now the bubble is going to college. The NCAA Men's Basketball Committee announced its 2021 March Madness tournament will be held in one centralized location, Indianapolis. The committee is in talks with the state of Indiana to ensure the 68-team tournament can go off without a hitch. The NCAA SVP of basketball said in a statement, "We have learned so much from monitoring other successful sporting events in the last several months, and it became clear it's not feasible to manage this complex championship in so many different states with the challenges presented by the pandemic." It's not exactly a one-size-fits-all, but the bubble approach did work well enough for professional basketball players in the NBA and WNBA. Now, whether it'll work for younger people who don't get paid to do this, we'll see. The tournament is scheduled to tip off March 15th. SpaceX made history Sunday after launching its first full-fledged operational mission with people on board. After initial delays, the ship left the Kennedy Space Center for its 27-hour voyage to the International Space Station. There was also a first within a first. The diverse crew of 4 featured pilot Victor Glover, the first black member of the International Space Station's extended crew. The astronauts are set to spend 6 months on the International Space Station. The crew decided last month to name their spacecraft Resilience as a nod to, wait for it, 2020.
Resilience is power to recover, will to restore, and we strive to survive because our mission is for everyone. In fact, Crew 1 is you one. All for one, one for all.
Petition to make that background music the new theme for In the Loop. And one more first. Kim Ang was named the general manager of the MLB's Miami Marlins, becoming the first woman and first Asian American to reach that level of the sport.
If you work hard and you persevere and you're driven and you just keep going, then eventually your dream will come true. I got calls and text messages from guys that I've known over the years who were just so excited to tell their daughters and wives.
Ang has spent 30 years in Major League Baseball, first starting as an intern for the Chicago White Sox. Later, she was an assistant GM in New York and LA, and was most recently the SVP of baseball operations for the MLB. Even though women have owned and still own professional sports franchises, Ang is the highest ranking woman in a baseball front office. Animation has seen an increase in viewership during the pandemic. I know because I've been a pretty strong contributor to that uptick, and I have receipts. This is a part of a renaissance of content that has moved from niche to mainstream. Newsy's Casey Mendoza explains how the animation industry has thrived this year.
Okay, I want you to take that vial of Simpsons goo and this picture to this address. They'll make us new Simpsons.
Between hit series like Adult Swim's Rick and Morty and animes like My Hero Academia, we're in the middle of an animation renaissance.
Right now, it's probably the biggest audience for adult animation that we've seen. It's not a fringe thing to be watching anymore.
During the pandemic, animation has only gotten more popular. The genre saw a 22% increase in viewership during the lockdown, according to the streaming search engine RealGood. That's more than any other category analyzed by the company.
Come watch TV.
In the streaming industry alone, platforms like Netflix and Hulu are bulking up their original animation lineups. When HBO Max launched in May, it heavily marketed its exclusive Studio Ghibli collection. And back in October, Sony was reportedly in talks to acquire the anime streaming service Crunchyroll for nearly $1 billion. Beyond that increase in demand, animation companies were also one of the few in entertainment that could continue working during the lockdowns.
Animation is itself a mode of making content that has been less impacted by COVID because it's not something that necessarily requires physical presence. And so we've been able to innovate in a variety of ways to ensure that the production lines keep humming and the content keeps delivering.
Animators are working from home, actors are installing voiceover booths in their closets, and back in April, the Writers Guild of America reminded its members, most of whom work for live-action productions, that studios and producers are increasingly interested in developing animated projects.
Early on, when it was evident that animation was the only thing that was really sort of COVID-proof, we were getting tons of animated show pitches. All of a sudden everyone had time and availability and apparently an animated idea in their back pocket.
See, now this show is a comedy that can balance both humor and dramatic tension.
It is demonstrating itself to be part of the mainstream and part of the sort of pop culture zeitgeist.
Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
You hear that, Mom? Animation isn't just some fringe thing. 33-year-old men can watch this stuff too. We're almost 2 weeks removed from Election Day, which, as I was writing this, could not believe just how long a year the last 2 weeks have been. In that time, the Trump campaign has challenged the election results in several states using and reusing baseless claims. Newsy's Patrick Terpstra focuses his lens on Pennsylvania and fact-checks some of those claims.
A challenge to the election in Pennsylvania. While there are multiple Trump lawsuits in Pennsylvania, legal experts are closely watching one of them. The case asks a federal judge to block Pennsylvania from certifying President-elect Joe Biden's win. That would deprive him of the state's 20 electoral votes.
I think you could see a blueprint here for other cases that they file in other states.
New court filings show Trump attorneys will scale back some of their claims that voting in Pennsylvania violated the U.S. Constitution and state law. They still say mail-in voters in heavily Democratic counties were, quote, illegally advantaged.
So as Democrats were disproportionately voting by mail, they were disproportionately picking up those added votes.
The campaign is challenging votes that arrived during a 3-day grace period after Election Day, something allowed this year because of delays in U.S. mail delivery. Hi there. We contacted the 7 counties listed in the lawsuit. Allegheny County received 947 ballots between Election Day and November 6th. Montgomery County got back 1,008 ballots in the same period. Those are 2 of the 3 biggest counties in the state. In total, Pennsylvania's Secretary of State has said 10,000 votes came in during those 3 days after Election Day. That's nowhere near enough for President Trump to overcome Biden, who leads by about 70,000 votes. Another complaint is not all counties allowed voters to correct or cure their mail-in ballots. Many states offer ballot curing so a vote won't be discarded for a minor mistake.
The remedy for it is simply that they throw out all of the mail-in ballots, and that's just never going to happen.
Getting the courts to disregard legal ballots also would be unprecedented and, according to civil rights attorney Kristen Clark, unconstitutional.
The several counties at issue in this case are home to some of the Commonwealth's largest numbers of Black voters and voters of color.
The lawsuit also alleges Republican observers did not have enough access to watch vote tabulations. It's true all observers, Republican and Democrat, were initially kept 20 feet or more away, but both parties had the same view of vote counting, which was also live streamed online. The lawsuit is a thick 86 pages, but what might be most significant to the courts is what's not in here: evidence of widespread illegal voting.
They're saying the states are going to have to prove to us that there is not widespread voter fraud, and that's not the way it works in court.
Patrick Terpstra, Newsy, Washington.
A delayed transition from one administration to another isn't just a bad look, it can also be harmful. The 9/11 Commission report found that a delayed handoff for George W. Bush back in 2001 affected the response to the attacks on September 11th. Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci says President Trump's delayed handoff could affect how President-elect Biden's transition team responds to the coronavirus pandemic.
President Donald Trump's coronavirus task force has been blocked from communicating with President-elect Joe Biden's transition team, who will meet with vaccine makers this week. The president has delayed the typical handoff to the next administration, a situation the nation's top infectious disease expert says is especially problematic amid the pandemic.
I've been through multiple transitions now, having served 6 presidents for 36 years, and it's very clear that that transition process that we go through, that time, the period of measured in several weeks to months, is really important in a smooth handing over of the information, as well as it's almost like passing a baton in a race. You don't want to stop and then give it to somebody. You want to just essentially keep going, and that's what transition is. So it certainly would make things more smoothly if we could do that.
Dr. Fauci told CNN's State of the Union that President Trump has not attended a White House coronavirus task force meeting in several months. Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, told NBC on Sunday that despite the delay in normal transitioning, the president-elect's staff will huddle with Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies in the coming days. Pfizer recently announced its vaccine data shows 90% effectiveness in preventing COVID-19, and other vaccine makers are also in their final phase of testing. While Dr. Fauci says he expects those vaccines to be highly effective as well, he says that high-risk groups like hospital and nursing home workers will get them first. Other Americans will most likely have to keep up preventative measures like social distancing well into next year while they wait for their doses. Still, Dr. Fauci said relative normalcy could return by spring or summer of 2021. Biden's outreach to vaccine manufacturers comes as the pandemic reaches a dangerous phase in the U.S. The country is adding about 1 million new cases each week, and deaths are averaging a 33% increase in just 2 weeks. For Newsy, I'm Johanna Grunaway.
If you haven't done so already, you can bug me on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. It's never really a bad time to reach out and let me know if I've got something on my face. COVID cases in the U.S. passed 11 million over the weekend, leading a lot of people to make some tough decisions about visiting family or friends during the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. And I'm one of them. Yeah, my butt is staying put too. Newsy's Bianca Fascini explains how holiday travel is expected to be impacted during this COVID resurgence.
The holiday season typically means crowded airports and lots of traffic, but it's going to look different this year.
We're expecting at least a 10% decline.
A recent surge in COVID-19 means a lot of families could be celebrating Thanksgiving virtually. New CDC guidelines say the safest option is to gather only with people in your household. So some travelers might make last-minute decisions.
What we've seen with travelers is this wait-and-see approach. They have plans to travel, but they may not follow through with those plans because they're seeing what's going on in the environment around them.
While the travel industry has partially recovered from the early days of the pandemic, a fall in holiday travel presents yet another challenge.
The airlines aren't going to have their usual holiday cash cows.
Every travel and travel-adjacent business is at risk of losing out on money before an almost guaranteed slowdown in spending.
It's really the last, in normal times, the last profitable time for several months because the winter is generally the worst time of year for the business of airlines.
The good news is a vaccine is in the works, which experts say is the only thing that eventually will bring travel back to its pre-pandemic heyday. Bianca Fascini, Newsy, Washington.
If you haven't been as active as you know you should be, I'm talking to myself, This next story is sure to put you to shame, or maybe motivate you to do better. A 33-year-old rode his bike across the country to speak to Americans and try to find some common ground. National reporter Usher Qureshi has more.
Geared up and ready to ride, Seth Gottesdiener recently embarked on a cross-country odyssey.
It's my preferred method of transportation, and I find it really meditative, and it's one of my favorite things to do athletically outdoors.
The 33-year-old social justice activist mounted his two-wheeler back in late September for what he called the Great American Bike Ride.
I thought, why don't I bike across America and talk to people, talk to just denizens of the country and see where they're at and see how this year has affected them and, their opinions.
The 45-day journey began in Los Angeles. His plan to pedal his way through 22 cities and 13 states, concluding his expedition in the nation's capital on Election Day.
Truthfully, I was not prepared for the Great Southwest. It was very intense. It was very unrelenting. The heat was over 100 degrees a lot of the days. Giant mountains, really, really dry.
All along the way, Seth met with Americans from all walks of life, interviewing them as part of a feature documentary.
I want people to hear voices that they would have never come encounter with on their own. I want to connect Americans together.
The ride also took him on a journey of self-discovery.
And then there was parts of the country that I hadn't ever seen before, like Arkansas, like Kentucky, and a lot of Tennessee, and it was beautiful.
It was also an opportunity, he says, to gain a better understanding of fellow citizens bitterly divided by politics. He hopes the journey reminds one another of the human spirit that connects us all.
Be there for each other, help each other, pull each other up by the bootstraps, rather than be so divided as we've seen this year. One of the questions that I asked, if there's one thing you could say to all Americans right now, what would it be?
He knows what he would say.
I would just say, listen.
In Chicago, I'm Usher Qureshi.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching and shaking off the weekend with us. We'll be back for more in the Loop tomorrow, same time, same place. But don't go anywhere just yet. And that's a request, by the way. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.